Hey guys! Tonight we are going on a journey into the cold. A journey back in time to the heart of a medieval winter, to a world without central heating, without thermal underwear, and without the simple luxury of a well-insulated house. We're going to explore the quiet, ingenious, and sometimes strange ways that ordinary people survived the longest, darkest, and coldest nights of the year. Frankly, it's a world where the primary source of extra heating at night was often to invite a cow into your one-room house. We are going to explore the forgotten art of simply staying warm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge encouragement. For those of you already settled in, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. Go ahead and drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm recording this in the deep quiet of the early morning, just after 4 a.m. on a Thursday, here in Atlanta, Georgia. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gentle whir of the fan fades away. It is replaced by a profound and absolute silence. You are waking up, but it is not a sound that has woken you. It is the cold. A deep, penetrating, and damp cold that seems to have seeped into your very bones. You open your eyes. You are in the pre-dawn darkness of a medieval peasant's hut. The air is so cold that you can see your own breath, a pale, ghostly plume in the gloom. The world outside is silent and frozen, and the world inside is not much warmer. This is not the crisp, clean, pleasant cold of a modern winter's day. This is a clinging and inescapable cold. It feels less like weather and more like a permanent state of being. And there is no thermostat on the wall to turn up. You are lying on a straw pallet on a dirt floor, under a single coarse wool blanket. You are in a small single-room dwelling. In the center of the room you can just make out the faint, dull red glow of a few dying embers in the central hearth. That small fading glow is the only source of warmth in your entire world. The period we are in is sometimes known to historians as the Little Ice Age, a time from the 14th to the 19th centuries when the winters in Europe were often significantly longer and more severe than they are today. For the medieval peasant, winter was not a time for cozy holidays. It was the great annual battle for survival. You look around the dark hut. The window openings are small, and they are not glazed with glass. They are simple wind eyes, which have been stuffed with straw and old rags to block out the biting wind of the night, plunging the room into an almost total darkness. Your options for a window are open and freezing, or closed and completely dark. Neither is ideal for enjoying the view, but both are very effective at encouraging you to stay under your blanket. Historians and archaeologists still debate the true comfort level of these simple peasant homes. Were they drafty, miserable, and constantly cold shelters? Or were their thick wattle and daub walls, their low ceilings, and their thick thatched roofs surprisingly effective at retaining heat, creating a small, smoky, but relatively cozy pocket of warmth in a frozen world? You hear the first stirrings of life in the hut. It is not from the human family sleeping on the pallet next to you. It is a soft, wet snort, followed by the sound of a slow, deliberate chewing. You realize, with a dawning sense of strangeness, that you have woken up in what is essentially a combination bedroom and barn. The air has a rich, earthy, and distinctly animal aroma. It is the strange, but not entirely unpleasant, smell of shared survival. Then the human family begins to wake. The first to move is the farmer's wife. She rises from her pallet in the cold darkness. Her first and most important task of the day is not to get dressed or to prepare food. It is to perform the sacred and absolutely vital ritual of bringing the fire, the heart of the home, back to life. She kneels by the hearth, and as she reaches for the water bucket to begin the day, her hand makes a dull, solid thud. The sharp, cracking sound echoes in the profound quiet of the pre-dawn hut. The farmer's wife has just struck the surface of the wooden water bucket with a ladle, and the sheet of ice that had formed on it overnight has shattered into a dozen pieces. It is so cold inside this small single-room hut that the family's drinking water has frozen solid. This is your first, and perhaps most shocking lesson in the reality of a medieval winter. This is the baseline temperature from which the entire day will begin. It is a simple fact of life that is almost impossible for us, in our centrally heated world, to truly comprehend. The idea that you must perform a small act of demolition just to get your first drink of water in the morning. It sets a certain tone for the day. A very, very cold tone. During the harsh winters of the Little Ice Age, the freezing of water indoors was a common and well-documented occurrence. In the simple, uninsulated, and often drafty dwellings of the peasant class, the temperature inside the house would not have been much warmer than the temperature outside, especially in the long dark hours after the fire had been banked for the night, and the water in that bucket represents a great deal of hard physical labor. It was not piped into the house. It was hauled by hand in heavy, sloshing wooden buckets from the village well or a nearby stream. A journey that, in the ice and snow of winter, would have been a difficult, slippery, and sometimes dangerous task, usually performed by the women of the household. You now understand the true purpose of the curfew, the covering of the fire at night. It was a vital safety measure, but it came at a great cost. From the moment the fire's life-giving warmth was smothered until the moment it was rekindled at dawn, the hut and everyone in it were surrendered to the full, invading power of the winter cold. The family had a choice every night: a small but very real risk of burning to death in a house fire, or the absolute certainty of freezing for 8 hours. They chose freezing. It was the more sensible, if significantly less comfortable, option. Historians who study the climate and daily life of the Middle Ages debate the long-term physical and psychological impact of this constant, seasonal exposure to cold. Did it lead to a higher incidence of respiratory illnesses, of rheumatism, of all the aches and pains that come from a life lived in the damp and the chill? And did it, on the other hand, shape a certain kind of mental resilience, a stoicism and a deep, communal acceptance of hardship that is very different from our modern expectation of almost constant comfort? Your modern body, accustomed to a world that is always a stable 70 degrees, is in a state of profound shock. But you look at the peasant family, who are now all beginning to stir. They shiver, they pull their wool cloaks tighter around themselves, but they do not seem surprised or particularly distressed by the frozen bucket. This is just morning. This entire scene, this cold, dark, and icy awakening, serves to reinforce the one absolute and central truth of winter survival. The fire is everything. It is not a luxury. It is not for atmosphere. It is the difference between life and death. There is no making a cup of coffee before the fire is lit. There is no checking your phone. There is only one task, one goal, one single, unifying purpose that drives every member of the household at this moment. And that is the sacred and desperate mission of transforming the few faint red embers, preserved from last night, into a new warm and life-giving flame. The farmer's wife, having broken the ice and scooped some of the frigid water into the great iron cauldron, now turns her full attention to the cold, gray ashes in the central hearth. Buried deep within them, you can just see a few tiny, precious, and faintly glowing sparks. Her most crucial task of the day is about to begin. The water bucket has been conquered. The farmer's wife now turns to the true, beating heart of the home, the central hearth. Buried deep beneath a protective, insulating blanket of last night's gray ash are a few precious, still glowing embers. Her first and most sacred ritual of the day is about to begin. It is the resurrection of the fire in your world. Creating fire is a trivial act. A flick of a lighter, the strike of a match. In the medieval world, before the invention of matches, it was a difficult and time-consuming skill. Restarting a fire from scratch, using a flint and steel to create a spark, or the friction of a fire drill, could take a long time and a great deal of effort. And so, the most crucial household skill of all was not starting a fire, but preserving it. The act of banking the fire at night, carefully covering the hot coals with a thick layer of ash to starve them of oxygen and allow them to smolder, rather than burn until morning, was an essential daily task. You watch as the woman kneels before the cold hearth. The family and the animals are all awake now, huddled in their blankets, watching her with a silent, focused intensity. This is the most important moment of their day. With her bare hands, she gently, carefully scrapes away the top layer of ash. She is like an archaeologist, searching for a buried treasure. And she finds it. Deep at the bottom of the pit are 3 or 4 small coals, glowing with a faint, deep, and pulsing red light. They are the living heart of the fire, the seeds of the new day's warmth. Now comes the delicate part. She takes a small tinder bundle, a handful of the driest moss of shredded bark, or perhaps a piece of a special tinder fungus that she has gathered from the forest, and she places it gently on top of the embers. Then she leans in close, purses her lips, and begins to blow. It is a process of immense skill and almost meditative patience. It is not a hard, forceful breath, which would blow the precious embers out. It is a slow, steady, and perfectly controlled stream of air. She is not just blowing. She is coaxing, persuading, and whispering the fire back to life. It is a conversation with the flame. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then a tiny, tentative wisp of smoke rises from the tinder. And then a single, small, beautiful, and most welcome flicker of a yellow flame. A quiet, collective sigh of relief seems to pass through the hut. The first battle of the day has been won. Now that a flame is established, she works quickly. She adds the kindling, a handful of the smallest, driest twigs, and as they catch, she adds slightly larger sticks, building the fire with a practiced and patient hand. Finally, she lays a proper log on top, and the fire takes hold, roaring up with a cheerful crackling sound. The hut begins to fill with 2 things. The first is a blessed, life-giving warmth, which begins to push back the bone-deep chill of the night. And the second is a great deal of smoke. The simple smoke hole in the roof is not very efficient, and a thick, gray, acrid haze quickly fills the upper part of the room. This had its benefits. The constant smoke would cure any meat that was hung from the rafters, and the creosote would help to preserve the thatch of the roof from insects and rot. The primary disadvantage was that you had to live your entire life in a state of being gently and perpetually smoked, like a piece of ham. Historians who study the skeletal remains from medieval sites often find evidence of chronic respiratory conditions, even in young people, likely a direct result of a lifetime spent breathing in the thick, toxic smoke of an indoor fire. But for now, the fire is the center of your universe. It is warmth. It is light in the pre-dawn darkness. It will soon cook your food. It will boil the water to make it safe to drink. And it is a powerful psychological shield against the great, cold, and dangerous darkness of the winter world outside. You huddle closer, feeling the blessed heat on your face and hands. You understand now. The hearth is not just a feature of the house. It is the sun, the heart, and the very soul of this small, fragile human world. The farmer's wife now hangs the great iron cauldron over the roaring flames. The icy water begins its slow journey towards becoming the morning's pottage. The first task of survival is complete. Now the second can begin. It is time for breakfast. The fire is alive, and the small single-room hut is now filled with a smoky, but deeply welcome warmth. The farmer's wife turns her attention to the great iron cauldron, which is now steaming cheerfully over the flames. The first and most important act of survival is complete. Now the second can begin. It is time to provide the body with the fuel it will need to fight the cold. It is time for breakfast. The pottage that is served in the winter is a different creature from the thin, vegetable-based stew of the summer months. In the summer, the garden is overflowing, and the pottage is full of fresh greens, beans, and herbs. But now, in the deep heart of winter, the garden is a frozen, sleeping thing. The food you eat now is the food of preservation, the carefully stored surplus from the autumn harvest. The ability to successfully store enough food to survive the long, cold, and unproductive months of winter was the single most important and most anxious task in the life of a medieval peasant. A single failed harvest, a rat infestation in the grain store, a rot that got into the stored vegetables, Any of these could, and often did, lead to a period of terrible starvation known as the Hungry Gap, the late winter and early spring months when the old food had run out and the new crops had not yet grown. So the winter pottage is a thick, substantial, and calorie-dense meal. Its base is made from dried pulses, peas and beans, that were harvested in the autumn and have been soaking overnight to soften. To this, the farmer's wife adds the stored vegetables of the winter, onions, and the hardy root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, which have been kept for months in a clamp, a simple but effective underground storage pit, a kind of natural refrigerator. And today, as a special treat against the bitter cold, she adds a precious ingredient. She takes a small, tough, and incredibly salty piece of cured pork from a hook in the smoky rafters, and she shaves a few small pieces of it into the bubbling pot. Salted and smoked meat, the product of the autumn pig slaughter, was the primary way of preserving protein through the winter. This small grayish piece of bacon is a treasure. It is the ghost of a time of plenty, and it will add a rare and wonderful flavor of salt and fat to the otherwise bland pottage. It is a taste of luxury, and a vital source of the energy needed to generate body heat. You are served your bowl of the thick, steaming pottage, along with a heavy slice of the dark, gritty bread. Eating in a medieval winter is a serious business. Every single mouthful is a small victory against the encroaching cold. You are not just eating for pleasure, you are loading your own internal furnace with the fuel it needs to keep from going out. It is the most important work of the day, so your vegetables have likely spent the last few months buried in a straw-lined hole in the garden, which is a surprisingly effective way to keep them fresh. It's also a great way to completely forget where you put them. Finding your dinner sometimes involved a certain amount of hopeful and experimental digging. Historians still debate the true nutritional quality of the medieval peasant diet. Was it, as is often assumed, a life of constant grinding malnutrition and vitamin deficiency? Or, when the harvest had been good and the stores were full, was this simple, high-fiber, whole-grain, and pulse-rich diet actually quite healthy? A stark contrast to the often unbalanced and meat-heavy diet of the aristocracy. The meal is over. It was hot, it was salty, and it was filling. The family is now warm both inside and out. The fire is roaring in the hearth, and their bellies are full of the slow-burning fuel they will need for the day. But with the fields frozen solid and often covered in a blanket of snow, what work is there for a farmer to do? The great outdoor labor of the agricultural year is paused, but the work of survival is never done. The great outdoor work of the fields may be sleeping under a blanket of frost or snow, but the work of a medieval peasant is never truly done. Winter is not a time of rest, but a time for a different, quieter, and more inward-facing kind of labor. It is the long, slow, and deeply important season of mending. Imagine you are in the hut now after the morning meal. The family is gathered in a small, tight circle around the central hearth, the only truly warm place in the entire world. The small, smoky room is now a busy and surprisingly productive workshop. The farmer, your host, has taken out his most valuable tool, the long, curved blade of his scythe. With a patient, rhythmic motion, he is drawing a whetstone along its edge, sharpening it for the spring to come. The soft metallic shing 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 of the stone on the steel is a quiet, meditative sound. Every farming tool, the hoes, the sickles, the wooden plow, must be repaired, cleaned, and sharpened during these cold months, ready for the great explosion of work that the first thaw will bring. His wife, your hostess, sits on a low stool, a simple bone needle in her hand. She is darning a large hole in the elbow of a woolen tunic. In your world, a piece of clothing with a hole in it is often discarded. In her world, clothing is an object of immense value, representing a huge investment of time and resources. A single tunic would be worn until it was threadbare, and then it would be patched. When it could no longer be patched, it would be cut up into smaller pieces to be used for patching other clothes. And when the patches themselves wore out, the final softest rags would be saved for making bandages or for the nursery. Nothing was ever wasted. Her mother, the old grandmother of the house, is engaged in the most ancient and constant of all winter tasks. She holds a simple tool, a drop spindle, little more than a weighted stick, and in her other hand a bundle of raw, greasy wool that has been washed and carded. With a skill that is so practiced it seems unconscious, she twists and spins the wool into a long, strong, continuous thread. The soft, whirring sound of her spindle is a constant, gentle hum in the background. This was the great, hidden industry of the medieval world, the cottage industry, that took place in millions of homes just like this one. While the men might focus on the repair of tools made of wood and metal, the entire world of textiles, the spinning of wool and flax into thread, the weaving of that thread into cloth, and the sewing of that cloth into garments, was almost entirely the domain of women. It was a skill of immense economic importance, passed down from mother to daughter through countless generations. Historians often debate the scale of this domestic industry. Was it purely for the family's own use, a form of simple subsistence production? Or did many peasant families, and particularly the women, produce a surplus of goods like woolen thread or simple cloth, that they could then take to a local market and sell to earn a few precious extra coins for the family? The atmosphere in the hut is one of quiet, purposeful industry. The only sounds are the crackle of the fire, the scrape of the whetstone, the whir of the spindle, and the sound of the wind outside. It is a scene of profound domestic peace. The family is together, they are warm, and they are all engaged in useful, productive work that will ensure their survival. After the frantic, exhausting chaos of the summer harvest, the quiet, focused rhythm of a winter's day must have been, in its own way, a kind of welcome rest. But as you watch, you notice that the small pile of firewood stacked next to the hearth is getting dangerously low. The fire, the very heart of this small, warm world, is a hungry and demanding creature. And the most important and most unavoidable daily task of a medieval winter, the one task that must be done outdoors, no matter how cold, must now be faced. It is time to go out into the frozen world and gather more fuel. The pile of firewood by the hearth, which seemed so large and reassuring this morning, has dwindled to just a few remaining logs. The fire, the very heart of your small, warm world, must be fed. The farmer looks at you, then at his eldest son, and gives a quiet, meaningful nod towards the door. The cozy indoor work of mending is over. It is time to face the cold. You bundle yourself in every layer of scratchy wool you possess. You pull a rough woolen cap over your ears and wrap a scarf around your face. You step outside. The world is a canvas of white and gray. A fresh layer of snow has fallen in the night, covering the muddy street and the thatched roofs in a thick, clean, and beautiful blanket. The air is sharp, cold, and so clean it feels like a physical thing in your lungs. And the world is profoundly, deeply silent. The usual sounds of the village are gone, muffled by the snow. The only sound you can hear is the soft, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of your own boots in the snow. You follow the farmer, who we will now call the woodsman, as his skills are about to become clear. You are heading for the forest that borders the village. The forest in winter is a place of stark, skeletal beauty. The great, deciduous trees are bare, their branches a delicate black lacework against the pale gray sky. It is a place that feels like it is holding its breath, sleeping, and waiting for the spring. The forest in the medieval world was a place of immense and vital importance. It was a source of food, of building materials, and most crucially in the winter, of fuel. But the forest was not a free-for-all. It was almost always owned by the local lord of the manor, and the peasants' rights to use the forest were strictly, and often jealously, controlled. As you enter the woods, the work begins. But you are not looking for great living trees. To cut down a living tree without the Lord's permission was a serious crime, a form of theft that could be punished severely. Instead, you are looking for deadwood. This was the peasant's primary right to fuel, a tradition known in English common law as estover. You had the right to gather any wood that had fallen to the ground, and to take any dead branches from standing trees that you could reach with a hook or a crooked staff. It is a slow, cold, and difficult way to gather fuel. You spend an hour, your hands numb with cold, struggling with one particularly stubborn, frozen branch, and your reward is a small, meager armful of firewood. The amount of sheer physical labor required to produce a single evening's warmth is staggering. You make a quiet, solemn promise to yourself that you will never, ever take a central heating thermostat for granted again. Historians who study the medieval climate debate the severity of these winter fuel shortages, especially during the colder centuries of the Little Ice Age. Were peasant communities often in a state of fuel poverty, constantly on the edge of freezing, desperately searching for enough wood to survive? Or were the traditional rites of Estover generally sufficient to meet their basic needs for heating and cooking? The answer likely varied greatly from one region to another, and from one year to the next. After several hours of this cold, hard work, you have gathered a respectable pile of fallen branches and deadwood. It is bundled together with thick, coarse ropes. Now it must be hauled by hand back to the village, a long, slow drag through the deep snow. You are now pulling a heavy bundle of wood through a frozen forest. You are cold, you are tired, and you have a new and profound respect for the simple, life-giving miracle of a warm fire. You feel that you have truly earned your seat by the hearth tonight. As you are about to leave, the woodsman pauses. He picks up two different-looking fallen branches. One is from an ash tree, the other from an apple tree. He tells you that a true woodsman does not just see wood. He sees different kinds of fuel, each with its own special quality, its own secret. Not all wood, he explains, is created equal. And it is time for you to learn the secret science of firewood. You stand in the silent, snowy forest, your hands numb, your back aching from the work of gathering wood. The woodsman you are with, the farmer from your hut, holds up the two branches he has selected, one from an ash tree and one from a long-dead apple tree. To an ignorant man, he says, his breath misting in the cold air, this is all just firewood. But a wise man knows that each tree has its own spirit, its own character, its own special gift to give to the fire. This is the beginning of a new lesson. Not in the grand, abstract knowledge of books, but in the deep, practical, and essential science of firewood. He holds up the ash branch. Ash, he says, is the king of the woods. He explains that ash is a magical tree, for it is one of the very few woods that will burn hot and bright even when it is green or unseasoned. It is a gift of instant warmth. Then he gestures with his head towards a great, fallen oak, too large for you to haul back. Oak, he explains, is for patience. An oak log, he says, must be seasoned for a year or more. It is hard to light, but once it catches, it will burn slowly, steadily, and with a great enduring heat, leaving a bed of glowing red embers that can keep a room warm through the longest winter night. The great hearths in the Lord's castle are fed with oak. And the apple branch? This, he says with a rare, small smile, is for pleasure. A log from a fruit tree like apple or cherry does not burn as hot as the ash or as long as the oak, but it burns with a beautiful, quiet flame and gives off a wonderfully sweet, fragrant smoke that will make the whole hut smell of summer orchards. It is a special treat, a piece of firewood to be saved for a festival day, or for the darkest and most depressing part of the winter. This traditional knowledge, passed down from father to son for 1,000 years, is a form of folk science that is remarkably accurate. The burning properties of different woods are determined by their density, their moisture content, and the presence of natural oils and resins. The dense hardwoods like oak and beech burn slowly and create the best coals for lasting heat. The lighter ash wood has a naturally low moisture content, which is why it can burn while still green. And the resinous softwoods like pine, which he warns you against, will burn fast and hot, but they spit and crackle dangerously, and their smoke creates a thick, sticky soot that will coat the inside of your hut. It is a form of science that is not written in books, but is carried in the memory of the people. Knowing which tree gives the best and safest heat is a piece of knowledge as vital for survival as knowing which wild plant is edible and which is a poison. This knowledge was also tied to the social structure. The lord who owned the forest would reserve the very best timber, the great ancient oaks, for his own use. The peasants, under their right of estover, had to make do with what was left, with the fallen branches and the lesser trees. As you make the long, cold walk back to the village, dragging your precious, and now carefully curated, bundle of firewood through the snow, you look at it with new eyes. It is not just a pile of dead sticks. It is a collection of different kinds of energy. There is the fast, bright, and cheerful energy of the ash, to start the evening's fire and bring life back to the cold hut. There is the slow, steady, and enduring energy of a piece of oak, to keep that fire going through the long, dark hours. And there is the small, sweet-smelling energy of the apple wood, a little piece of hoarded pleasure for a cold winter's night. But even with all this work, the bundle of wood you have gathered is not very large. It will not last long. And you learn that in many parts of the country, in the great treeless fenlands or the windswept moorlands, even this meager supply of firewood was a luxury. In those places, the peasants had to rely on another, even more humble and more surprising source of fuel. The bundle of wood you have so laboriously gathered seems precious. But imagine, for a moment, that you are a peasant living not in a well-wooded landscape, but in the great, flat, and almost treeless fenlands of eastern England, or the windswept, boggy moorlands of the north. Here, wood was a rare and often unobtainable luxury, the property of the lord, reserved for the construction of his great halls. To survive the winter in these places, the common people had to rely on a different, much more humble, and profoundly fragrant source of fuel. You see it now, stacked neatly by the side of the peasant hut, a pile of what looks like dark, rough earthen bricks. This is the village's other great source of winter warmth. It is turf. And turf was often made from one of the most plentiful and renewable resources available to any medieval farmer. Animal dung.it is a powerful reminder of the absolute, zero-waste resourcefulness of the medieval world. In a life of profound scarcity, nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. Even the most humble and unpleasant of substances was a valuable resource, a gift of warmth for a cold winter's night. This was the ultimate form of recycling. The use of dried animal dung as a primary fuel has been a common practice in treeless regions around the world for thousands of years. And in many parts of medieval Europe, it was essential. The process of creating this fuel was another of the endless seasonal tasks. In the summer months, the dung from the cattle would be collected from the pastures. It would often be mixed with other materials like straw, peat from a nearby bog, or even a little coal dust, to help it bind together and burn more evenly. This mixture would then be formed by hand into neat bricks or cakes, which were then left out in the sun to dry for weeks, until they were as hard and as dry as a piece of wood. These turf bricks would then be stacked and stored, a precious hoard of stored energy for the coming winter. It adds another item to the long list of difficult medieval jobs. You have your miller, your mower, and your weaver. And now you have your dung cake artisan. It was a skilled and absolutely essential profession, though probably one with very little social prestige that evening. As the fire in your hut begins to die down, the farmer does not place another of your precious logs on the flames. Instead, he takes one of these dark, earthy turf bricks and places it carefully on the glowing embers. This fuel burns in a very different way from wood. It does not produce a bright, cheerful, dancing flame. Instead, it is a slow, smoldering, and almost flameless fuel. It burns with a low, steady, and incredibly long-lasting heat. A single turf brick could smolder for hours, making it the perfect fuel for keeping the perpetual pottage simmering, or for banking the fire at night to keep a low level of warmth in the hut until morning.it also produced a very different kind of smoke. The burning of dried dung creates a thick, pungent, and deeply acrid smoke. This earthy, slightly barn-like aroma would have been the signature scent of a winter's evening in millions of homes across the medieval world. It was a smell that probably took a great deal of getting used to, but it was the smell of survival. It was the smell of warmth. Archaeologists who excavate the sites of medieval hearths can often identify the type of fuel that was used by analyzing the chemical composition of the ash and soot left behind. They debate the fuel economy, of the medieval household. How did a family decide which fuel to use on any given night? Was it a simple matter of what was available? Or was there a clear hierarchy, with the bright, cheerful but fast-burning wood being used for the main evening hours, and the slow, smelly, but long-lasting turf being used to keep the fire alive through the long, cold night? The fuel for the fire, the external source of warmth, is now secured. But in the great, nightly battle against the cold, this was only the first line of defense. The second, and even more important line of defense was a personal and portable one. It was the clothes on your own back. The fire in the hearth provides the external warmth, a precious and hard-won island of comfort in a sea of cold. But to survive a medieval winter, especially when you had to venture outside, you had to carry your own personal, portable furnace with you. Your most important piece of survival technology was not a clever tool or a machine. It was the clothes on your back. Imagine you are looking at the peasant family, now bundled against the morning chill. Their clothing is a masterclass in simple, effective, and sustainable insulation. The star of this show, the material upon which their entire survival depends, is wool. Wool was the dominant textile of the Middle Ages, the foundation of the English economy, and the perfect material for a cold, damp climate. Its properties are almost magical. The natural crimp in the wool fibers creates thousands of tiny air pockets, and it is this trapped air that provides the incredible insulation, keeping your body heat in and the cold out. And most crucially, unlike a material like cotton, wool retains its insulating properties even when it gets wet. In a world of rain, sleet, and snow, this was a life-saving quality. Furthermore, the wool that this family is wearing is not the highly processed, super soft merino wool of your modern sweaters. It is a coarse, heavy, and still slightly greasy homespun wool. That slight greasiness is the natural lanolin from the sheep, and it makes the fabric highly water-resistant. It is a simple, natural, and very effective form of waterproofing. The secret to staying warm, as the medieval peasant knew instinctively, was layering. The farmer is not wearing one single, thick garment. He is wearing several thinner layers. Against his skin is a simple linen undershirt. Over that is his main woolen tunic. And over that, for a journey outside, he would wear a heavy, thick, and often hooded wool cloak or mantle. It is a simple but brilliant system that we still use today. The air trap between each layer provides an extra, invisible shield against the cold. The medieval peasant, without any formal knowledge of thermodynamics, understood this perfectly. They were the original pioneers of the layered look. That a peasant did not have a separate winter wardrobe and a summer wardrobe. They had for the most part one set of clothes. In the freezing cold of winter, they simply wore all of it at once. In the heat of the summer, they might strip down to just their linen undershirt. And what about at night? The luxury of special nightclothes, of pajamas or a nightgown, was unknown to the common person. You would simply sleep in your linen undertunic, or more often than not, you would sleep completely naked, huddled for warmth with the rest of your family under a pile of wool blankets or animal skins. So your daywear is a tunic. Your nightwear is no tunic. It's a very simple and low-maintenance wardrobe, and it certainly cuts down on the amount of laundry that needs to be done. Historians who study material culture often debate the true sensory experience of wearing this clothing. Was it, as our modern sensibilities might imagine, a constantly scratchy, heavy, and unpleasant experience? Or were people of the era simply accustomed to the feel of coarse wool against their skin? Was some of the homespun wool, prepared with care by the women of the household, actually much softer and less irritating than we assume? You look at the peasant family, bundled up in their layers of simple, undyed, russet-colored wool. They do not look fashionable. They do not look particularly comfortable, in the modern sense of the word. But they look warm. And in the deep, biting cold of a medieval winter, warm is the most beautiful, the most luxurious, and the most desirable state a human being can possibly achieve. You have the fire to warm the air. You have the clothes to warm your body. But there is one final and crucial layer of defense against the great enemy that is the winter cold. It is the house itself. You look at the simple mud and stick walls of the hut, and you wonder how this flimsy-looking structure could possibly stand up to a freezing gale-force wind. You are warm in your many layers of scratchy wool. The fire is burning steadily in the central hearth. But the great cold enemy, the winter wind, is always searching for a way into your small sanctuary. Your final layer of defense, after your clothes and the fire, is the very wall of the hut itself. And keeping that wall solid was a constant and surprisingly messy job. Imagine you are looking closely at the wall of your peasant hut. It is not made of solid stone or timber. It is a technology called wattle and daub. The wattle is a woven lattice of flexible wooden sticks or river reeds, a bit like a giant rough piece of wickerwork, which forms the skeleton of the wall. The daub is the thick, plaster-like substance that is smeared onto this wickerwork frame to fill in all the gaps and create a solid surface. And what is this daub made of? It is a simple, effective, and locally sourced mixture of wet soil or clay, sand, a binding agent like straw or animal hair, and most importantly, animal dung. The fibrous, partially digested plant matter in the dung of a cow or a horse was an excellent binder, helping to hold the clay together and to prevent it from cracking as it dried out. So you are living inside a house that is essentially a basket, plastered over with a mixture of mud and manure. It was an incredibly common, cheap, and surprisingly effective building material, used for thousands of years in many parts of the world. Its primary drawback was that it was not permanent. The daub would crumble and crack over time, and the wind and the rain were always working to find a way through. This created one of the most essential and unending of all winter chores, stopping the drafts. You would have spent a part of almost every winter's day in the unending task of chinking, or replastering, the walls of your hut. You would take a handful of the wet daub mixture, a substance with the texture of very thick, very cold, and very smelly mud, and you would use your own hands to smear it into any new cracks or holes that had appeared, plugging them against the wind. It is a form of home maintenance that is deeply personally hands-on. You are not calling a repairman. You are using your own two hands to plug the holes in your wall with a mixture that includes a significant amount of cow poop. It is effective, but it is not elegant. Other forms of insulation were also used. The farmer would pile great bales of dry straw against the outside of the hut, especially on the side that faced the prevailing winter wind. He would bank up earth against the base of the walls, and inside, the dirt floor would be covered with a thick, insulating layer of fresh, dry straw or rushes, which also had to be replaced regularly as it became damp and rotten. The constant wood smoke inside the hut, while a nuisance, also played a role. The thick, greasy soot would coat the interior walls and the underside of the thatched roof, and this layer of soot would actually help to seal up the tiniest of cracks, acting as a kind of smoky, accidental sealant. It is another example of a medieval feature that was both a terrible problem and a surprisingly useful solution at the same time. Archaeologists who have created modern reconstructions of these peasant houses debate their true level of comfort and insulation. How effective was a well-maintained wattle and daub wall? Modern experiments have shown that a thick, well-chinked wall, combined with a thick thatched roof and the body heat of the family and their animals, could create a surprisingly cozy and effective shelter, keeping the interior significantly warmer than the freezing temperatures outside. Your modern home is a static fortress against the elements. A medieval hut was more like a boat in a constant slow-motion storm. It always needed bailing. There was always a new leak to be plugged, a new draft to be stopped. Staying warm was not a passive state. It was a full-time job. But now the day's work is done. The drafts have been chinked. The firewood has been gathered. The tools have been mended. The sun is beginning to set. And it is time for the great reward and comfort at the end of a long, cold day. It is time for the evening meal. The sun has set. The long, cold winter twilight has deepened into a profound and absolute darkness outside. But inside the hut, this is the best and most cherished part of the day. The family gathers on low, rough stools and on the packed earth floor, drawing in as close as they can to the roaring, crackling central fire. It is time for the evening meal. The iron cauldron, which has been simmering at the edge of the hearth all day, is now lifted and placed in the center of the small group. The farmer's wife removes the wooden lid, and a great, thick, and wonderfully fragrant cloud of steam billows up into the smoky rafters. This is the main meal of the day, and it is a much thicker and more substantial affair than the thin gruel of the morning. The pottage has been slowly cooking for hours, and the dried peas and barley have broken down into a thick, rich stew. It is full of the sweet, earthy flavors of the root vegetables that have been stored since the autumn harvest: turnips, parsnips, and carrots. And tonight, a more generous portion of the precious, salty, smoked pork has been shaved into the pot, its rich fat melting to give the stew a depth and a flavor that is a true luxury. This meal is not just about flavor. It is about survival. The evening meal was the most crucial nutritional event of the day. It was the time to consume a large amount of hot, calorie-dense food. The calories you are eating now will be converted by your body into the heat you will need to survive the long, cold, and unheated hours of the night. Eating in a medieval winter is a serious business. Every mouthful is a small victory against the cold. You are not just eating, you are loading your internal furnace with the fuel it needs to keep from going out. You are handed your wooden bowl, and you eat as the family does, using a thick slab of the dark, gritty bread as your spoon. To your modern palate, it is still a very simple meal. But here in this cold, smoky hut, after a long day of your own small labors, it tastes like the most delicious and profoundly comforting food in the entire world. The fire is the center of everything. In a world without any other form of light or entertainment, the fire is the family's television, its internet, its social media, all rolled into one. You stare into the dancing, hypnotic flames. In a slightly more prosperous farmhouse, the hearth might be built against a wall, with a great, smoke-hooded opening. The most coveted seats in the entire house would be the small benches placed right inside this great fireplace, on either side of the fire, in a space known as the chimney corner or the ingle nook. This was the warmest, coziest, and most prestigious place a person could sit on a cold winter's night. Getting that seat was a matter of high strategy and social standing. The grandfather probably always got the best spot. The children, and any unfortunate, low-ranking time travelers, probably got the drafty spots further away. Historians who study the medieval family often debate the nature of this evening time. Was it a time for storytelling, for the passing down of folk tales and oral traditions from one generation to the next, a time of crucial social bonding? Or, after a brutally long and exhausting day of physical labor, was it a mostly silent affair, a time for the weary family to simply and quietly refuel before collapsing into sleep? Tonight, there is not a lot of witty dinner conversation. The main topics of discussion are "this is hot," and "can you pass the bread?" But it is a comfortable and easy silence, the silence of people who have spent their entire lives in this small shared space, and who do not need a great deal of words to understand each other. It is the quiet of family. The meal is over. The bowls are scraped clean. The family does not disperse. They simply draw closer to the fire, the children leaning against their parents, the old grandmother nodding in her seat. The work of the day is done. The bell for the evening prayer of Compline has already rung from the distant village church. And now, in the long dark hours before sleep, comes the only form of entertainment the evening has to offer. It is time for a story. The bowls are scraped clean and stacked away. The family is warm, full, and gathered in a tight, quiet circle around the glowing hearth. In the long dark hours between the end of the evening meal and the beginning of sleep, there is no book to read, no game to play. There is only the fire and the darkness and the stories. The old grandmother, the elder of the family, clears her throat with a soft, dry rasp. Her voice is thin and reedy, like the winter wind in the thatch, but everyone in the hut, from the farmer down to the smallest child, falls completely silent to listen. She is the keeper of the family's history, the living library of the village's memories. And she is about to tell a story to end your modern world. History is a thing of books, of dates and facts and the names of great kings. Here, in this pre-literate peasant world, history is a living, breathing thing. It is a story, passed down from one generation to the next in the quiet darkness of a winter's night, told by the flickering light of a fire. This oral tradition was the primary means of transmitting knowledge, cultural values, and the vital lessons of survival. The grandmother's story is not a grand epic of gods or heroes. It is a local and cautionary tale, a story from her own grandmother's time, about a particularly harsh winter known as the Winter of the Wolf Moon. Her voice is a low, mesmerizing chant. She tells of a time when the snow fell so deep that the huts were buried up to their roofs. She speaks of the wind, which howled for a month without stopping. She tells of the deer and the boar, driven from the deep forest by hunger, coming right into the village. And she tells of the great hunger that befell the people, when the stored grain began to run out and the spring seemed as if it would never come. This is the medieval version of a history lesson. It has no precise dates. It has no famous names. It is a history of the things that truly matter, of cold, of hunger, of fear, and of the simple, quiet courage of ordinary people. The moral of her story is a simple one and a powerful one. She tells of one family in the village that, in their fear, barricaded their door and jealously hoarded what little food they had, refusing to share with their neighbors. And that family, she says, was the first to perish. But the other families, the ones who pooled their resources, who shared their last handfuls of grain, who looked after each other's children, they survived. They survived together. She might end her story with a simple, ancient proverb, a piece of wisdom polished smooth by 1,000 retellings. A single log, she might say, burns bright, but it burns fast and is soon gone. A pile of logs burns together, and it can keep a fire alive through the longest night. Folklorists and historians still debate how to interpret these oral traditions as direct historical sources. How much of the grandmother's story is a literal, factual memory of a specific, particularly severe winter that happened 100 years ago? And how much of it is a more timeless, archetypal myth, a story that has been told and retold for generations, its details changing, but its central, vital moral lesson about the importance of community remaining the same? You sit in the warm, smoky darkness, captivated. You do not understand every word of her local dialect, but you understand the story perfectly. You understand it in the hushed, reverent tone of her voice. You understand it in the wide, fearful eyes of the children who are listening, huddled close to their parents. And you understand it in the way the real wind howls outside the hut, providing a perfect, dramatic soundtrack to her tale of a great winter long ago. The story is over. A deep, comfortable silence settles over the room. The fire is beginning to burn low. The children are heavy-eyed, leaning against their parents, on the very edge of sleep. The time for the final preparations for the long, cold night has come. The farmer rises and stretches his aching back. He walks to the heavy wooden door of the hut, but he is not going out into the cold. He is about to let someone else in. The grandmother's story is finished, its final quiet words hanging in the warm, smoky air of the hut. The fire is beginning to burn low. The farmer gets to his feet, stretches his back, and lifts the heavy wooden bar from the door. He pulls it open, and a blast of intensely cold, night air swirls into the room, making the fire dance wildly and causing everyone to shiver and pull their blankets tighter. But he is not going out. He is bringing in the overnight guests. You watch, with a sense of growing bewilderment, as he leads the family's single precious milk cow into the one-room hut. She is followed by the 2 family goats. This is the final and most important piece of the medieval winter survival strategy. The reasons for this are twofold. The first is safety. The animals were the family's most valuable assets. A single cow was a source of milk, of cheese, of butter, and of a calf each year. It was the family's savings account, their insurance policy, and a vital source of protein. To leave it outside in a simple pen on a freezing winter's night would be to risk its death from exposure, or to leave it vulnerable to the wolves that still roam the forests, or, just as likely, to human thieves. But the second reason is the one that fills the hut with a sudden, welcome, and almost magical warmth. It is the simple, powerful, and life-giving reality of body heat. The practice of cohabitation, or sharing a dwelling with your livestock, was a common winter survival strategy in many parts of Northern Europe during the Middle Ages. You are now sharing your very small bedroom with a cow. Her name is probably something sensible like Buttercup. She smells strongly of hay, of milk, and of cow. She is also, you are about to discover, a remarkably effective, if somewhat fragrant space heater. A large animal like a cow generates an immense amount of body heat. In a small, enclosed, and relatively well-sealed space like this hut, that body heat makes a significant difference to the ambient temperature. The animals are led to their own designated corner for the night, a space with a thick bedding of fresh, dry straw. And as they settle down, you can physically feel the temperature in the room begin to rise by several degrees. The sensory landscape of the hut has now changed completely. To the smell of wood smoke and damp wool, you must now add the rich, earthy, and not entirely unpleasant smell of warm animals and clean hay. The sounds too have changed. The quiet of the hut is now filled with the soft, rhythmic, and deeply peaceful sound of the cow contentedly chewing her cud, the occasional soft snort, and the shuffle of a hoof on the straw. Archaeologists and historians debate the exact layout of these peasant dwellings. In some regions, a more formal longhouse design was common, with a single, long building that had a partition in the middle, with the family living at one end and the animals at the other, all under one roof. But in a simpler hut like this one, the sharing of a single common space was the norm. The final, complete, medieval winter survival system is now fully assembled. You have the low, radiant heat from the carefully banked fire. You have the insulating power of your many layers of wool clothing. You have the thick straw on the floor and the daub on the walls, keeping the worst of the drafts at bay. And now you have the great, steady, living furnace of the animals, their slow metabolisms a constant source of precious, life-giving warmth. It is a strange, an incredibly intimate scene. A multi-generational human family and their most valuable farm animals, all sleeping together, sharing their warmth and their breath in a single small smoky room. It is a world away from your own, but there is a deep, simple, and powerful logic to it. It is the logic of shared survival, of a symbiotic relationship where the humans protect the animals from the cold and the predators, and the animals, in turn, protect the humans from the killing frost of the night. The animals are settled. The small single-room hut is now filled with the new and gentle warmth, the combined body heat of both the human and the animal families. There is one last, crucial ritual to be performed before sleep can come. The fire, which has been the bright, roaring, and cheerful heart of the evening, must now be put safely to bed. You watch as the farmer takes a simple shovel and carefully banks the fire for the night. This is a process of both preservation and safety. He pushes the glowing logs and the hot embers together into a tight, compact pile in the center of the hearth. Then, he carefully covers this pile with a thick, insulating blanket of the fine, gray ash from the edges of the fire pit. This is the act of the curfew, the couvre-feu. It is not designed to extinguish the fire completely. It is designed to starve it of oxygen, to slow its burning down to a slow, almost imperceptible smolder. This ensures that no stray sparks will leap out in the night and set the dry thatch of the roof on fire. And just as importantly, it ensures that the precious, hard-won fire will not die completely. Deep within that blanket of ash, a core of intense, living heat will be preserved, ready to be resurrected in the morning as the last of the glowing red embers disappears under the gray ash. The hut is plunged back into a deep, almost absolute darkness. The one single source of light is gone. The only illumination now is the faint, silvery light of the moon, filtering weakly through the small, cloth-stuffed window opening. Now, it is time for the family to sleep. They do not retire to separate private bedrooms. They make their way to the one large sleeping area of the hut. This might be a simple, raised wooden platform, or just a designated section of the floor, piled high with a deep, insulating mattress of clean, dry straw. This is the family bed. You lie down on your own smaller pallet nearby, and you witness the final and most fundamental of all the medieval winter survival strategies: huddling. The entire family, the farmer, his wife, their children, the grandmother, all lie down together, sharing the same small space, their bodies close together, sharing their warmth under a pile of coarse wool blankets and perhaps a few cured animal skins. The concept of a private, personal sleeping space is a modern luxury. In the medieval world, sleep, especially in the winter, was a communal, huddled affair. It was cozy, it was warm, and it meant that you were never, ever far from the sound of your grandfather's snoring. Social historians debate the profound psychological effects of this family bed. Did this constant, close contact, communal sleeping arrangement foster a different sense of family, a different idea of the individual self, than our modern private bedroom culture? It was a world with almost no physical privacy from birth until death. The hut is now as safe and as warm as it is going to get. The fire is sleeping. The animals are settled. The family is huddled together. You lie in the deep, profound darkness, listening to the new soundscape of the night. The roaring of the fire has been replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping family. You can hear the deeper, slower breaths of the cow in the corner, and the sound of her contentedly chewing her cud. And from outside you can hear the lonely, mournful howl of the winter wind, a sound that now seems distant and powerless, unable to touch you in your small, warm sanctuary. You lie there, a stranger in this strange, warm, breathing, and slightly smelly little ark. You are surrounded by the gentle sounds of life, both human and animal. And outside, the great, cold, and indifferent winter rages. But in here you are safe. You are warm. And after the longest and strangest day of your life, you finally begin to drift off to sleep. The bundle of firewood you have so diligently gathered may seem precious. But imagine for a moment that you are a peasant living not in a wooded area, but in the vast, flat, almost treeless wastelands of eastern England, or the windswept moors of the north. Here wood is a rare and almost unattainable luxury, the property of the Lord, reserved for the building of his great halls. To survive the winters in these places, commoners must rely on another, much more humble and very fragrant source of fuel. Now you see it, neatly stacked next to the farmer's hut, a pile of what looks like dark, rough-hewn earthen bricks. This is the village's other great source of winter warmth. It's peat. And peat is often made from one of the most abundant and renewable resources available to any medieval farmer. Animal dung.it is a powerful reminder of the sheer, unsparing resourcefulness of the medieval world. In a life of profound scarcity, nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. Even the humblest and most unpleasant substances were a precious resource, a gift of warmth on a cold winter night. This was the ultimate form of recycling. The use of dried animal dung as a primary fuel has been a common practice in treeless regions around the world for millennia, and in many parts of medieval Europe it was essential. The process of creating this fuel was an endless, seasonal affair. During the summer months, manure from livestock would be collected from pastures. It was often mixed with other materials such as straw, peat from a nearby bog, or even a little coal dust, to help it stick together and burn more evenly. This mixture would then be shaped by hand into neat bricks or cakes, and left to dry in the sun for weeks, until they were as hard and dry as a log. These peat balls would then be stacked and stored, a precious reserve of energy for the coming winter. It added another entry to the long list of difficult medieval jobs. You had millers, haymakers, and weavers. And now you have dung pie artisans. It was a skilled and absolutely essential occupation, though probably of little social prestige that evening. As the fire in your hut begins to die down, the farmer does not add one of your precious logs to the fire. Instead, He takes one of these dark earthen bricks and places it carefully on the glowing embers. This fuel burns in a very different way to wood. It doesn't produce a bright, happy, dancing flame. Instead, it is a slow, smoldering fuel with almost no flame. It burns at a low, steady temperature and for an incredibly long time. A single peat pellet can smolder for hours, making it the perfect fuel for keeping an endless pot of porridge simmering, or for a nighttime fire to keep a low heat in the hut until morning. It also produces a very different kind of smoke. The burning of dry dung produces a thick, pungent, deeply acidic smoke. This earthy, slightly barn-like scent would have been the scent of a winter evening in millions of homes across the medieval world. It is a smell that will probably take a long time to get used to, but it is the smell of survival. It is the smell of warmth. Archaeologists excavating medieval hearth sites can often determine what fuel was used by analyzing the ash and soot content. They debate the fuel economy of the medieval household. How did a family decide what fuel to use? Was it a simple matter of availability, or was there a hierarchy of fuels, with wood being the most desirable, and peat or dung being the fuel of the poor? Fuel for the fire, an external source of warmth, is now assured. But in the nightly battle against the cold, this is only the first line of defense. The second, and even more important, line of defense is personal and portable. It is the clothes on your back. The fire in the hearth provided warmth from the outside, a precious and hard-won island of comfort in a sea of cold. But to survive a medieval winter, especially when you ventured outside, you had to carry your own personal, portable fireplace. Your most important piece of survival technology wasn't a tool or a machine. It was the clothes on your back. Imagine looking at the peasant family, now huddled indoors against the morning chill. Their outfits are a masterclass in simple, effective, sustainable insulation. The star of the show, the material on which their entire survival depends, is wool. Wool was the dominant fabric of the Middle Ages, the bedrock of the English economy, and the perfect material for cold, damp climates. Its properties are almost magical. The natural folds in the wool fibers create thousands of tiny air pockets. And it is this trapped air that provides incredible insulation, keeping your body heat in and the cold out. And most importantly, unlike a material like cotton, wool retains its insulating properties even when wet. In a world of rain, sleet, and snow, this is a life-saving quality. Furthermore, the wool this family is wearing is not the super soft, highly processed merino wool that you find in modern sweaters. It is a coarse, heavy, still slightly greasy wool spun at home. That slight greasy feel is natural lanolin from sheep, and it makes the fabric highly water-resistant. It is a simple, natural, and very effective form of waterproofing. The secret to staying warm, as the medieval peasant knew instinctively, was to wear layers. The peasant didn't wear a single heavy garment. He wore several thin layers. Against his skin was a simple linen undershirt. Over that was his main woolen tunic. And over that, for an outing, he would wear a heavy, thick, often hooded woolen cloak. It was a simple but brilliant system that we still use today. The air trap between each layer provided an additional, invisible shield against the cold. The medieval peasant, without any formal knowledge of thermodynamics, understood this perfectly. They were the early pioneers of layering. The peasant did not have a separate winter wardrobe and a summer wardrobe. He had, for the most part, one set of clothes. In the freezing cold of winter, he simply wore them all at once. In the heat of summer, he might strip down to his linen undershirt. And what about at night? The luxury of special nightwear, of pajamas or nightgowns, was something that the common people did not know. You would usually sleep either naked or in the same linen undergarments you wore during the day, huddled under wool or fur blankets for warmth. So your daytime outfit was a tunic. Your nighttime outfit was no tunic. It was a very simple and low-maintenance wardrobe, and it certainly cut down on the amount of laundry you had to do. Historians of material culture often debate the actual sensory experience of wearing this type of clothing. Was it, as our modern senses might imagine, a constant, itchy, heavy, and uncomfortable experience? Or did people simply get used to the feel of the coarse wool against their skin? You look at the peasant family, wrapped in layers of undyed russet wool. They don't look fashionable. They don't look particularly comfortable, in the modern sense of the word. But they look warm. And in the deep, biting cold of a medieval winter, warmth is the most beautiful, luxurious, desirable state a human being can attain. You have a fire to warm the air. You have clothes to warm your body. But there is one last, crucial defense against the great enemy of winter cold. It is the house itself. You look at the simple walls of the hut made of wattle and daub, and you wonder how this seemingly flimsy structure can withstand the bitter wind. You're dressed in warm layers. A fire is burning in the hearth. But the big, cold enemy, the winter wind, is always trying to penetrate your little shelter. Your last line of defense after your clothes and the fire are the walls of your tent. And keeping those walls strong is a constant and surprisingly messy job. Imagine you are looking closely at the wall of your peasant hut. It is not made of stone or solid wood. It is made of a technique called mold and clay. The mold is a woven network of flexible wood or reeds, like a giant rough piece of wicker, that forms the skeleton of the wall. The mold is a thick mortar-like substance that is plastered over this framework of the mold to fill in the gaps and create a solid surface. And what is this clay made of? It's a simple, effective, locally sourced mixture of wet soil or clay, sand, a binder like straw or animal hair, and most importantly, animal manure. The fibrous, partially digested plant matter in cow or horse manure is an excellent binder, holding the clay together and preventing it from cracking as it dries, so you're living in a house that's basically a basket, plastered with a mixture of mud and dung. It's an incredibly common, cheap, and surprisingly effective building material, used for thousands of years in many parts of the world. Its main drawback is that it's not permanent. The clay will crumble and crack over time, and wind and rain will always find a way to get through. This created one of the most essential and never-ending winter chores, caulking. You would spend part of most every winter day engaged in the never-ending task of plastering the walls of your hut. You would take a handful of wet clay mixture, a substance that had the texture of very thick, very cold, and very smelly mud, and you would use your own hands to spread it into any new cracks or holes that appeared, sealing them against the wind. It was a very practical, personal form of home maintenance. You didn't call a repairman. You were using your own two hands to plug holes in the walls with a mixture that included a significant amount of cow dung. It was effective but not elegant. Other forms of insulation were also used. The farmer would stack large bales of hay against the outside walls of the hut, especially on the windward side. He would pile dirt up against the base of the walls, and inside the dirt floor would be covered with a thick layer of straw or dry reeds to insulate against the cold ground. The constant smoke inside the hut, while a nuisance, also played a role. Thick, greasy soot would coat the inner walls and underside of the thatched roof, and this soot actually helped seal up the smallest cracks, acting as a sort of smoke sealant incidentally. It was another example of a medieval feature that was both a terrible problem and a surprisingly useful solution at the same time. Archaeologists who have created reconstructions of these peasant dwellings debate how comfortable and insulated they really were. Would a well-maintained wall of wattle and daub be effective at keeping out the cold? Modern experiments have shown that a thick, well-plastered wall, combined with a thick thatched roof and the body heat of the family and their animals, could create a surprisingly cozy and efficient shelter, keeping the inside considerably warmer than the outside. Your modern home is a static fortress against the elements. A medieval hut is like a boat in a slow-motion storm. It always needs bailing. There's always a new leak to plug, a new draft to block. Staying warm isn't a passive state. It's a full-time job. But now the day's work was done. The cracks were sealed. The firewood was gathered. The tools were mended. The sun was beginning to set. It was time for the main meal, the great reward and comfort of the day. It was time for supper. The sun has set. The long, cold winter twilight has deepened into a profound darkness outside. But inside the hut, this is the best and most cherished part of the day. The family gathers on low, rough stools and on the packed earth floor, drawing in as close as they can to the roaring, crackling central fire. It is time for the evening meal. The iron cauldron, which has been simmering at the edge of the hearth all day, is now lifted and placed in the center of the small group. The farmer's wife removes the wooden lid, and a great, thick, and wonderfully fragrant cloud of steam billows up into the smoky rafters. This is the main meal of the day, and it is a much thicker and more substantial affair than the thin gruel of the morning. The pottage has been slowly cooking for hours, and the dried peas and barley have broken down into a thick, rich stew. It is full of the sweet, earthy flavors of the root vegetables that have been stored since the autumn harvest: turnips, parsnips, and carrots. And tonight, a more generous portion of the precious, salty, smoked pork has been shaved into the pot, its rich fat melting to give the stew a depth and a flavor that is a true luxury. This meal is not just about flavor. It is about survival. The evening meal was the most crucial nutritional event of the day. It was the time to consume a large amount of hot, calorie-dense food. The calories you are eating now will be converted by your body into the heat you will need to survive the long, cold, and unheated hours of the night. Eating in a medieval winter is a serious business. Every single mouthful is a small victory against the encroaching cold. You are not just eating for pleasure, you are loading your own internal furnace with the fuel it needs to keep from going out. You are handed your wooden bowl, and you eat as the family does, using a thick slab of the dark, gritty bread as your spoon. To your modern palate, it is still a very simple meal. But here in this cold, smoky hut, after a long day of your own small labors, it tastes like the most delicious and profoundly comforting food in the entire world. The fire is the center of everything. In a world without any other form of light or entertainment, the fire is the family's television, its internet, its social media, all rolled into one. You stare into the dancing, hypnotic flames. In a slightly more prosperous farmhouse, the hearth might be built against a wall, with a great, smoke-hooded opening. The most coveted seats in the entire house would be the small benches placed right inside this great fireplace, on either side of the fire, in a space known as the chimney corner or the ingle nook. This was the warmest, coziest, and most prestigious place a person could sit on a cold winter's night. Getting that seat was a matter of high strategy and social standing. The grandfather probably always got the best spot. Historians who study the medieval family often debate the nature of this evening time. Was it a time for storytelling, for the passing down of folk tales and oral traditions from one generation to the next, a time of crucial social bonding? Or, after a brutally long and exhausting day of physical labor, was it a mostly silent affair, a time for the weary family to simply and quietly refuel before collapsing into sleep? Tonight, there is not a lot of witty dinner conversation. The main topics of discussion are "this is hot" and "can you pass the bread?" But it is a comfortable and easy silence, the silence of people who have spent their entire lives in this small shared space, and who do not need a great deal of words to understand each other. It is the quiet of family. The meal is over. The bowls are scraped clean. The family does not disperse. They simply draw closer to the fire, the children leaning against their parents, the old grandmother nodding in her seat. The work of the day is done. The bell for the evening prayer of Compline has already rung from the distant village church. And now, in the long dark hours before sleep, comes the only form of entertainment the evening has to offer. It is time for a story. The bowls are empty and have been scraped clean with the last of the bread. The family is warm and full. In the quiet that follows the meal, the old grandmother, the elder of the family and the keeper of its memories, clears her throat with a soft, dry rasp. Her voice is thin and reedy, like the winter wind in the thatch, but everyone in the hut, from the farmer down to the smallest child, falls completely silent to listen. She is about to tell a story to end your modern world. History is a thing of books, of dates and facts and the names of great kings written down on a page. Here, in this largely illiterate peasant world, history is a living, breathing thing. It is a story, passed down from one generation to the next in the quiet darkness of a winter's night, told by the flickering light of a fire. This oral tradition was the primary means of transmitting knowledge, cultural values, and the vital lessons of survival. The grandmother's story is not a grand epic of gods or faraway heroes. It is a local and cautionary tale, a story from her own grandmother's time, about a particularly harsh winter the village endured, a winter they still call the Winter of the Wolf Moon. Her voice is a low, mesmerizing chant, a rhythm that has been polished smooth by 1,000 retellings. She tells of a time when the snow fell so deep that the huts themselves were buried, and the people had to dig tunnels from one door to the next. She speaks of the wind, which howled for a month without stopping, a hungry beast that seemed to want to tear the very roofs from the houses. She tells of the deer and the boar, driven from the deep forest by starvation, coming right into the village in their desperation. And she tells of the great hunger that befell the people, when the stored grain began to run out and the spring seemed as if it would never, ever come. This is the medieval version of a history lesson. It has no precise dates. It has no famous names. It is a history of the things that truly matter, of cold, of hunger, of fear, and of the simple, quiet courage of ordinary people. The moral of her story is a simple one and a powerful one. She tells of one family in the village that, in their fear, barricaded their door and jealously hoarded what little food they had, refusing to share with their neighbors. And that family, she says, her voice dropping to a whisper, was the first to perish. But the other families, the ones who pooled their meager resources, who shared their last handfuls of grain, who looked after each other's children as if they were their own, they survived. They survived together. She might end her story with a simple ancient proverb. A single log burns bright, but it burns fast and is soon gone. A pile of logs burns together, and it can keep a fire alive through the longest night. Folklorists and historians still debate how to interpret these oral traditions as direct historical sources. How much of the grandmother's story is a literal factual memory of a specific, particularly severe winter that happened a century ago? And how much of it is a more timeless archetypal myth, a story that has been told and retold for generations, its details changing, but its central vital moral lesson about the importance of community remaining the same? You sit in the warm, smoky darkness, captivated. You do not understand every word of her local dialect, but you understand the story perfectly. You understand it in the hushed, reverent tone of her voice. You understand it in the wide, fearful eyes of the children who are listening, huddled close to their parents. And you understand it in the way the real wind howls outside the hut, providing a perfect, dramatic soundtrack to her tale of a great winter long ago. The story is over. A deep, comfortable silence settles over the room. The fire is beginning to burn low. The children are heavy-eyed, leaning against their parents, on the very edge of sleep. The final preparations for the long, cold night have been made. The animals are inside. The fire has been banked. The family is huddled together, their bellies full and their hearts warmed by a shared story. The day is truly over. The grandmother's story is over. The last of the ale has been drunk. The fire has been carefully banked for the night, its light and roaring voice now reduced to a gentle, sleeping warmth buried deep within the ash. The children, their minds full of tales of the great winter, are already half asleep, their heads resting on their parents' shoulders. The day is truly and finally done. You lie down on your straw pallet in the profound and absolute darkness. The sounds of the hut have changed. The human voices are gone, replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping family. You can hear the deeper, slower breaths of the cow in the corner, and the quiet, meditative sound of her contentedly chewing her cud. You can hear the occasional soft rustle of the straw as someone shifts in their sleep, and from outside you can hear the lonely, mournful howl of the winter wind. but it no longer sounds like a threat. It is just the sound of the world outside, a world that cannot touch you here. In your small, warm, and living sanctuary, it is a world of almost unimaginable hardship. And yet, here in the darkness, surrounded by the quiet, gentle sounds of sleeping life, both human and animal, there is a deep and profound sense of peace. It is the peace of having survived another day. It is the peace of being warm when the world is cold, of being sheltered when the great winds blow, of being together when the night is long and dark, as you finally begin to let go, to drift off into the deep earned sleep you have craved all day. You have one last quiet realization. Survival here in this world is not about great heroic battles against armies or monsters. The great battle is a quiet one. It is a battle fought every single day against the cold, against hunger, against the simple grinding forces of entropy. And you win this battle not with a sword or a grand gesture, but with the quiet, patient, and endlessly repeated work of mending, of gathering, of sharing, and of simply waiting for the sun to rise again. And as you surrender to that deep-earned exhaustion, our journey into the long medieval night comes to its peaceful end. The memory of the icy water in the bucket, the scratch of the woolen tunic against your skin, the smoky warmth of the fire, and the gentle rhythmic breathing of the family, and their animals in the darkness, all of these can now begin to soften and fade, like the details of a half-remembered dream. The story is over. The peasant family in the small hut has survived the night. The sun will rise again, and you, safe and comfortable in your own wonderfully warm and modern bed, can let go of this long and difficult journey. There is nothing left to do now but to appreciate the quiet, the comfort, and the profound peace of your own world, and to drift into a deep and restful sleep.